The Senate chamber fell silent as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked to the witness table, her navy blazer perfectly pressed, her natural hair styled in a sleek bob that caught the overhead lights. The 33-year-old former public defender from Texas had been called to testify about voting rights legislation, but what happened next would shock the entire nation. Senator Lindsey Graham sat at the committee table, his face already flushed red, hands gripping a stack of papers like weapons. The South Carolina Republican had been growing increasingly agitated throughout the hearing, and everyone in the room could feel the tension building like a storm about to break. "Miss Crockett," Graham's voice cracked through the microphone, his southern drawl thick with barely contained rage. "You Democrats think you can just waltz in here and lecture us about democracy while you're trying to destroy it." The room erupted. Camera flashes went off like lightning strikes. Crockett didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her microphone, looked directly into Graham's eyes, and smiled. What happened in the next 30 seconds would be replayed millions of times, across every social media platform, turning a routine Senate hearing into the political moment of the year. Graham thought he could intimidate the young black congresswoman from Texas. He was dead wrong. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss these explosive political moments. To understand why this confrontation was so explosive, you need to know who these two political figures really are and what brought them to this boiling point. The South Carolina Republican built his career as a sharp-tongued attack dog, never afraid to raise his voice or throw political punches. He survived countless political battles from impeachment trials to Supreme Court confirmation. Graham sees himself as a guardian of traditional Senate decorum, which in his mind means young Democrats should show proper respect to their elders. But Graham had been having a rough year. His approval ratings back home was slip. Younger Republicans were calling him a Rio, Republican in name only. The Trump base that once loved him was turning cold. He needed a moment to prove he was still the fighter they remembered. On the other side of the chamber, said Jasmine Crockett, and she couldn't have been more different. At 33, she's part of a new generation of Democratic leaders who refuse to play by the old rules. Before Congress, Crockett was a civil rights attorney and public defender in Dallas, fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She didn't come to Washington to make friends or follow traditions. She came to get things done. Crockett had already made waves in her short time in Congress. She'd gone viral multiple times for her sharp questioning during committee hearing. Unlike older Democrats who often tried to find compromise, Crockett believed in fighting fire with fire. Her motto was simple: respect is earned, not given based on age or seniority. The legislation they were discussing would determine whether millions of Americans, particularly in communities of color, would have their voting access protected or restricted. For Graham, this was about preserving what he called election integrity. For Crockett, it was about protecting democracy itself. The hearing had been tense all morning. Republican senators had been aggressive with Democratic witnesses, interrupting them, cutting off their answers, and making snide comments under their breath. Crockett had watched it all, taking notes, waiting for her turn. Graham had been particularly combative. He'd already raised his voice at two other witnesses, pounded his fist on the table, and made several comments that had Democratic senators shaking their head. The cameras loved it. Graham playing the role of the angry conservative defender, standing up to what he called woke Democrats trying to federalize our elections. But Graham had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the young woman from Texas who was about to take the microphone. There was history between these two. 6 months earlier, during a House Judiciary Committee hearing, Crockett had questioned a witness that Graham had recommended. Her questioning had been so effective that it had completely undermined Graham's narrative about voter fraud. Graham had been furious, calling her questions gotcha politics and showboating. Since then, Graham had made several comments about young Democrats who don't understand how things work in Washington. He'd never mentioned Crockett by name, but everyone knew who he was talking. Political insiders had been waiting for these two to face off directly. Crockett, for her part, had been preparing for this moment. She'd studied Graham's tactics, watched hours of his old hearings, and knew exactly how he operated. She told her staff that morning, "If Senator Graham wants to bring the heat, I'm ready to show him what Texas heat really feels like." The stage was set. The veteran senator who thought his seniority and volume could intimidate anyone versus the young congresswoman who'd built her career standing up to bullies in courtrooms across Texas. The nation was about to witness what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. The tension in the Senate committee room had been building all morning, like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Graham had already shown his cards. He was in full attack mode, his voice growing, louder with each witness, his questions becoming more like accusations than inquiry. "Congresswoman Crockett," Graham began, his voice deceptively calm as he shuffled through his papers, "you've been quite vocal about this voting rights legislation. Tell me, in your vast experience," he paused, letting the sarcasm, "how exactly do you justify federal interference in state election laws?" Crockett leaned forward slightly, her hands folded calmly on the table. "Senator Graham, I appreciate the question. Federal oversight of voting rights isn't interference. It's constitutional protection. The 15th Amendment." "Oh, please," Graham interrupted, his voice rising. "Don't lecture me about the Constitution, young lady. I was studying constitutional law when you were in elementary school." The room stirred. A few Democratic senators shifted uncomfortably. Republican staffers behind Graham exchanged glances. This was escalating faster than usual, even for Lindsey. "Graham." Crockett didn't take the bait. "Senator, with respect, the Constitution doesn't have an expiration date based on when someone learned about the principles are the same whether you studied them in 1985 or 2015. You Democrats come in here with your talking points and your viral video moments, but you don't understand the real-world consequences of what you're proposing." He stood up from his chair, a power move designed to intimidate. At 60 tall, Graham towered over the seated Croc. "These election laws you want to overturn were passed by democratically elected state legislatures. But I guess democracy only counts when it goes your way, right?" The cameras zoomed in on both faces. Graham's was flushed, his jaw clenched, a vein visible on his forehead. Crockett remained perfectly composed, though her eyes had narrowed slightly, the only sign that she was calculating her next move. "Senator Graham," she said, her voice still steady, "I notice you keep mentioning democracy. Can you explain to me how making it harder for people to vote strengthens democracy?" "That's not what we're doing," Graham shot back, his voice now echoing through the chamber. "We're protecting election integrity, but you wouldn't understand that because all you care about is what?" Senator Crockett interrupted smoothly. "All I care about is what?" The Graham had walked right into it, and experienced political observers in the room could see it happening in real time. He was so angry, so focused on dominating the exchange.